Hi everybody, and welcome back to my new YouTube channel, Delta 4 Productions, where I'll be displaying and discussing shoulder sleeve insignia and pocket patches from U.S. Army airborne units of World War II and U.S. Army Special Forces units of the Vietnam War. So today is vlog 3, and it's going to be our first look at a Vietnam Special Forces pocket patch. And this patch is called a Snakebite patch. And Snakebite has a really interesting history. It was part of the top secret studies and observations group. So let's talk a little bit about that history. Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group was formed in January 1964 with a mandate to conduct unconventional warfare operations throughout the theater during the war in Vietnam. SOG was organized into many different branches and groups. The most well-known group was Ops 35, called the Ground Studies Group. And it was to Ops 35 where Snakebite teams were assigned. Although there is a fairly sparse paper trail regarding Snakebite teams were personnel from the Okinawa-based 1st Special Forces Group who went on 6-month temporary duty TDY tours to SOG in Vietnam. I would imagine mostly due to manpower issues with the SOG ground elements. They were always short of personnel, and even though 5th Special Forces Group was in country and responsible for Vietnam beginning in March of 1964, even 5th Special Forces Group was not part of SOG, although its members on paper were assigned to the 5th Special Forces Group Special Operations Augmentation. So 1st Group, which was again in Okinawa, would send these volunteers over to SOG to either run reconnaissance with the reconnaissance teams or be a part of the larger hatchet forces. The very first cross-border missions that were run into Laos under SOG auspices were run by personnel from the 1st Special Forces Group on Okinawa, and this was in October of 1965. However, at that time, these TDY teams from 1st Group were not called Snakebite teams. As near as I can tell through my limited research of what is available out there, it appears that the first Snakebite teams, or the first teams designated Snakebite, were teams that were sent in the spring of 1969. And I'll share a picture of Snakebite Team 1 with you in just a few minutes. Ops 35, or Ground Studies Group, was almost exclusively made up of U.S. Army Special Forces personnel who were assigned to reconnaissance teams and larger units that at differing times in differing places were called hatchet forces or exploitation companies or slam companies. And typically the nucleus of Ground Studies Group were reconnaissance teams that were made up of mountain yard personnel. These were tribesmen from the various tribes there in Vietnam who were trained and led by Special Forces personnel on these recon teams and on the larger units like hatchet forces. The reconnaissance teams were typically made up of 2 to 3 American personnel and 6 to 9 indigenous personnel, although they rarely ran that large cross-border. These reconnaissance teams, which usually ran on the small side, 6 to 9 personnel, would venture cross-border into Laos and Cambodia, where no other U.S. units were allowed, and would conduct reconnaissance missions along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, other enemy network trails. They would wiretap enemy communications lines. They would, from time to time, snatch prisoners. They would do bomb damage assessments. They would photograph truck parks along the trail, things like that. This is the picture I mentioned earlier that shows Snakebite 1 in April of 1969 at Camp Longtan, which is where Detachment B-53 was located, and those are the folks who did all the in-country training courses for SOG personnel. So because this is the spring of 69, and it's Snakebite 1, which I believe I have the orders for, I'm pretty sure that this is when the teams became known as Snakebite teams. The hatchet forces to which Snakebite personnel were assigned were also constantly in harm's way and essentially exploited larger targets cross-border. One of the most well-known hatchet force operations was the Tailwind operation that you can read about online, and there's also a book that Tiltmeyer wrote about the Tailwind operation. Those kinds of operations were typical for reconnaissance teams and the larger hatchet forces. So one of the most important aspects, I think, of collecting these patches is learning about the history of who wore them, why they wore them, when they wore them. And to me, it's always about the veterans, and I collect these patches as a tribute to them, remembering what they did, why they did it. So you need to have a really good reference library. When it comes to SOG, there are lots of books out there. On my personal library shelves, I counted 43 titles, 43 SOG-related titles. So there are a lot of them out there, a lot of good ones. I'm just going to show you one or two here very quickly. The one on the left is from Radix Press, and I'll have a link to Radix Press down in the description box below. This is the Who's Who from MACV SOG book. It's a mammoth Bible on rosters and personnel, and I believe he has an updated CD of this book as well. The book is out of print, and he's not going to reprint it. And you will find Snakebite personnel in this book, names, dates, and you might even find the names of the reconnaissance teams where they were assigned. So good book to have if you can find it. If not, try to grab the CD, and that's at specialforcesbooks.com. The other book is an oldie but goodie. It's a 4-volume set by a SOG veteran named Harvey Saul. And for its time, it was printed in the early 90s. It's really packed with good information. So if you can find the set, especially Volume 1, which is very difficult to find, buy it, add it to your library. Here are just a couple of more well-known, really good books. The one on the left is a big photo history of the Secret Wars by SOG vet John Plaster, who also has 2 more books that you can look into. And then you have Jason Hardy's MACV SOG series. This particular one I had signed by the guy on the cover, Larry White, a few years ago, so that's pretty cool. But Jason has put out 11 of these, packed full of reconnaissance team information, plus you'll find Snakebite people in there as well. He's done 2 other volumes related to this series, and he's also just released a MACV SOG Recon Team patch book, which is great. So go over to thedogtag.com or specialforceshistory.com. Make contact with Jason. If you don't have his books, you need to get them. They're awesome. These 2 books are by a friend of mine named John Stryker-Meyer, also known as Tilt. And he is, I know, a great friend of many collectors. He's a guy that'll get out to shows. He'll talk to you. He'll sign his books. These are really good books. 2-tour vet at Command and Control North running reconnaissance. If you can find these books and get them, they're well worth it. Here are the last 2 that I'll share with you, even though I have a lot more. Like I said, just on my shelves alone, I found 43 books on SOG. The one on the left is a really good book about FOB2 at Kontum, which became Command and Control Central. It's called Uncommon Valor by Stephen L. Moore, and it's a really good history of that unit. The one on the right is a big picture book called Running Recon by Frank Greco, another SOG vet. Really good books. There are lots of them out there. I wish I could show you all of them, but just jump on Amazon or to some of the sites that I'll be linking for you and find these books if you're interested in SOG. You can't go wrong learning about the history of the patches that you collect. Given the limits of my technical expertise and the length of the videos, I can't go into, as I said earlier, more detail, even though I'd love to. I've actually spoken to snakebite vets, talked to them about their training before they deployed to Vietnam, talked about their experiences in Vietnam. I also have some documents that I acquired from the National Archives or from Raid Express that show when these teams were deployed and who the personnel were, but I just don't have time to show you those things. So do some research, have fun looking into the history of these guys and what they did. Like most other Army units, and indeed all branches of the services in Vietnam, Army Special Forces were prolific wearers of unauthorized pocket patches. So this snakebite patch is but one of many, and hopefully down the road we'll be able to show you many more that were worn by Special Forces personnel in Vietnam. But at some point, obviously, after these TDY teams from 1st Group on Okinawa were designated snakebite teams, somebody had this design made up, patches produced, and I'll tell you a little bit about the patches here that I have. So the patch on the left is a Vietnamese-made machine-embroidered patch that is not too difficult to find. You can find these with high-quality dealers who really know their stuff. Bob Chad at Vintage Productions, Jason Hardy at the Dog Tag. And these guys will typically, in the course of a year, will probably have a couple of these for sale. Now, the patch on the right is an Okinawan-made patch, and these are much more rare. And I was able to get this patch from Jason Hardy, and I'll tell you a little bit about that here in a moment, and talk a little bit more about the designs and the quality of each of these patches. If you look at this patch here on the left, the Vietnamese-made version, look at the skull, the beret, the eyes, look at the jump wings up on top, look at the snake, and then we're going to compare it to the Okinawan-made patch right now. So the Okinawan-made patch is also machine embroidered, but look at the difference. Look at the detail on the parachute, look at the beret, look at the eyes, look at the snake, and it's just a much more detailed patch, much nicer looking, and that's very typical of Japanese or Okinawan-made pieces in terms of the pocket patches. Quickly, I just wanted to show you the backs of these patches so you get an idea of what real ones look like. If you go to the U.S. Military Air Forum and look up fakes, there are entire threads on Vietnamese and other wartime-made fakes and reproductions. So have a look at those. If you can get to some shows like the ASMIC show or the Show of Shows or the MAC show, you'll be able to handle these patches, talk to the experts, and they'll tell you all about why they're real, why they're not. But U.S. Military Forum has some great pictures of fakes and reproductions. eBay is absolutely full of fakes purported to be from Vietnam, or, well, a lot of them are from Vietnam, but they are made presently in Vietnam. And they always try to dirty them up by putting them in, tea or coffee or something like that, so that you have this dingy, dirty patch. And that's one of the telltale signs of a fake. So there's a lot to learn, and you can learn a lot by joining ASMIC, getting their quarterly trading post, and going to the U.S. Military Air Forum, going to these shows and learning who to talk to and listening to what they have to say. So as I stated just a moment ago, the Okinawan-made snakebite patch is tougher to find, very rare, and Jason Hardy had one, and this is kind of a lesson for collectors, especially new collectors. Get to know the dealers, get to know fellow collectors. Because I knew Jason, I called and said, hey, do you know where I can find a snakebite patch, an Okinawan-made snakebite patch? And even though it was not listed on his site, he had one, and he said, I'll let it go. I'll sell it to you. So it's a good lesson. Make those phone calls, send an email, text, talk to these dealers, talk to these other collectors, start networking, and you never know what you might find. And by doing those things, hopefully, you'll learn a lot more about the patches and you'll avoid getting burned by unscrupulous dealers and collectors. On page 4 of every volume of Jason Hardy's SOG series is a picture of this Snakebite patch. And this is the exact patch that I'm sharing with you guys today. So thank you for joining me on vlog 3 of my series here at Delta 4 Productions. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to ask. Please give this a thumbs up and subscribe. Let other people know that this channel is out there. I'd appreciate that. And we'll see you next week, hopefully. Take care.